Today, right now, obviously is an environment in which there is just a tremendous amount of espionage and cyber activity. I mean, for people like Bryan and me who, are of a certain age, and we're not going to talk about that in detail.
We weren't around in 1929.
Definitely not. But, folks who went through the shift from the Cold War to the CT crisis of post 9/11 and saw, 10, 20 years of that. Well, we've now shifted, for those of you keeping score at home, into something what the intelligence community calls the 2+3 framework. So instead of this very, very focused, effort to defeat Al-Qaeda and Islamic State and violent extremist groups, you now have this 2+3, which is Russia and China, and then Iran, North Korea, and violent extremists of all type coming in, number 5, basically, of the 2+3. The real focus these days is on nation-state adversaries, particularly Russia, and most of all, probably China. And the threat vectors that those national security adversaries or competitors embody are just very different than the ones that were presented by, terrorist groups. By and large, terrorist groups did not have sophisticated cyber capabilities the way nation states do. They wanted to, do what the intelligence people call kinetic strikes, actually blow stuff up. And that was their preferred modus operandi. The preferred attack vectors or threat vectors for our nation state competitors and adversaries are much more in the cyber realm, much more about digital data, and are definitely focused on stealing secrets, to include by, compromising encryption or getting around encryption wherever they can.
Yeah, and I think the big sea change, David, in our careers has been when we started, it was largely or maybe exclusively governments and intelligence agencies and military commands that even bothered to use encryption. And now encryption is in everyone's life. It's in everyone's financial interest.
Yep. It's
being constantly attacked. In fact, recently commenting on the continuing and massively expanding Chinese cyber espionage, that their espionage, of course, is probably as old as China. But in 2020, FBI Director Wray said words to the effect that the stakes could not be higher, and the potential economic harm to American businesses and the economy as a whole almost defies calculation. And also echoed a former leader of our intelligence services who said that China has now committed the greatest transfer of wealth in human history by cyber espionage.
It's actually been interesting to watch Kris, who I know, from our days serving together at DOJ, talk about this. The Bureau has been very, very loud in conveying the concerns. And he said things like, we open several new investigations every day. This is unprecedented. And the Chinese government has a lot of resources, and including a lot of people at its disposal. And they really are, from what you can tell, just looking at both the indictments and prosecutions and the statements and public testimony of intelligence officials, they're just flooding the zone. And they're being pretty successful, I think, in getting around limitations and exfiltrating a lot of valuable information, to include intellectual property, secrets about design from the defense industrial base, that is like weapons system information, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it is a very, very serious business right now, and it is the focus of your intelligence community for sure.
And China in particular is not even shy about it. I mean, they don't even concede that economic espionage is a legal, moral, or ethical problem. I used to work for a while for a medical device company, and one of the things you would do if you wanted to export to China is you'd have to send them a prototype of your device so they could make sure that, for import reasons, it was safe and everything. And on more than one occasion, the samples that we sent just came back in a box completely disassembled. Like, right. They don't even try to hide it. And you've talked a little bit, David, about the current threat environment, but let's dive into that a little bit deeper, because I think it's important for people to understand the stakes that are involved here.
Yeah, well, so as I said, the IC today is looking at the 2+3 framework. They're not uniquely focused on counterterrorism anymore, and they are especially focused on China. And they do see China as the pacing threat across the whole cyber domain. The other thing that's been really going on is the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the cyber activity that's been associated with that. I see, and I guess another level of it, because it's what we tend to see, I think, as we look at the evolution of national security threats, is just increasing complexity. So, in the good old days of the Cold War, there was the Soviet adversary, and it was one adversary, and it was mutually assured destruction and kind of an existential threat. But at least, Smiley's people knew how to deal with the Russian counterparts and so forth. You then had sort of an evolution towards a counterterrorism threat with basically one main adversary, that's Al-Qaeda, in the Fatah region and centrally located there. You then saw a diversification of that CT threat. You now see a diversification of the cyber and nation state threat. And in addition to nation state actors, you've got ransomware criminals and quasi-private sector, quasi-public sector people acting there at the behest of various nation state elements, or at least seemingly at their behest. And then you've got, rich black markets and for zero-day exploits, that is ways of breaking into computer systems that have not been around or exposed for a long time, and so haven't been patched. Yeah. And so it's that obviously lowers barriers to entry for all kinds of people who might want to get into the business of cybersecurity misconduct.